Eleanor Gable stood on the rain-slicked pavement outside her own mansion, watching the movers haul away a velvet armchair she'd bought in Paris 20 years ago. The yellow police tape stretched across the gate like a slap in the face. She wasn't bankrupt. Not really. But her children didn't know that. Her lawyer, Henderson, had whispered earlier that morning, "If you want to see who they really are, you have to stop being the woman who signs the checks. You have to become a woman who can't even ask for a glass of water." Eleanor gripped the handle of a suitcase that smelled of mothballs and shame. She turned her back on the mansion and headed for the only place she thought she'd be safe, her son's office. Jace's office was at the top of a glass tower that seemed to look down on the rest of the world. Eleanor walked past the receptionist, who was too busy on a personal call to notice an old woman in a tattered wool coat. She pushed open the heavy oak doors to Jace's inner sanctum. Jace was mid-shout. "I don't care if the Gable name is toxic. Sell the shares. Distance us." He turned, saw her, and the phone nearly slipped from his hand. "Mother? What the hell are you doing here?" Eleanor didn't speak. She opened her mouth, letting out a dry, pathetic rasp, and pointed to her throat. She looked at him with wide, pleading eyes, holding out a hand that trembled with genuine fear, not of poverty, but of the look on his face. "Is it true?" Jace hissed, stepping toward her but stopping 3 feet short, as if she were a crime scene. "The news said the feds moved in. They said you're wiped out. Did you lose the offshore accounts too?" Eleanor nodded slowly, a single tear cutting through the grime she'd wiped onto her cheeks. Jace didn't hug her. He didn't offer her a chair. He paced the length of the room, his face turning a dark, ugly red. "Do you have any idea what this does to my IPO? I'm trying to take this company public, and now my mother is a headline for fraud. I can't have you here. I can't even be seen with you." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a wad of cash, and peeled off a $50 bill. He shoved it toward her. "Go to a motel, somewhere quiet, somewhere far from the financial district. I'll have my people call you when the dust settles. Just go. Please." He turned back to his window, leaving her standing in the middle of the room with a crumpled $50 bill and a heart that felt like it had been pierced with an ice pick. Eleanor left for Beatrice. By the time she reached the gallery where Beatrice was hosting an art opening, her legs were shaking. She stood near the entrance, watching her daughter laugh with a group of women who wore silk and diamonds like armor. Beatrice spotted her. For a split second, recognition flashed in her eyes, followed immediately by a cold, calculating mask of disgust. She didn't walk over. She signaled to a security guard and pointed at her mother. "Excuse me," the guard said, blocking Eleanor's path. "This is a private event." Eleanor pushed past him, grabbing Beatrice's arm. She tried to make a sound, a cry for help, but she kept the silence of the experiment, her eyes screaming the words her lips wouldn't. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" Beatrice said, her voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. She gently pried Eleanor's fingers off a designer sleeve. "You must be mistaken. I think there's a community kitchen 3 blocks down. They handle people in your situation." Beatrice leaned in, her voice a low, venomous whisper that only Eleanor could hear. "You ruined the family name in one morning. Don't you dare ruin my night. If you don't leave right now, I'll have them arrest you for harassment. You're not a mother anymore. You're a liability." She turned back to her friends, laughing as if she hadn't just discarded her own mother like a piece of trash. The sun was down by the time Eleanor reached the small, cramped house on the edge of the city. The porch light was flickering, and the sound of a crying toddler drifted through the thin walls. This was Sarah's house. Eleanor knocked, her spirit almost entirely broken. The door swung open. Sarah stood there in her nursing scrubs, looking exhausted. She saw Eleanor, the coat, the suitcase, the silent, trembling lips, and she didn't say a word about money. "Mom!" Sarah gasped, dropping a bag and pulling Eleanor inside. "I've been calling you all day. I saw the news, and I went to the house, but the police wouldn't let me in. I was so scared." Sarah pulled her into the kitchen, which smelled of cheap coffee and burnt toast. She sat her mother down and wrapped a thin, faded blanket around her shoulders. "You can't talk? It's okay. It's a shock," Sarah said, her voice thick with tears. She knelt down and started unlacing Eleanor's wet shoes. "Mark, get the space heater. Mom's here. She's safe." Eleanor looked around the tiny, cluttered room. There were bills on the counter marked overdue. There was a hole in the linoleum floor. But as Sarah pressed a warm mug into her hands and kissed her forehead, Eleanor felt a warmth that Jace's millions and Beatrice's diamonds could never buy. "We don't have a lot, Mom," Sarah whispered, holding her mother's hands. "But we have a bed, and we have dinner, and we have each other. You're staying here. We'll figure the rest out together. I promise." Eleanor took a sip of the tea, the silence in the room finally feeling like peace instead of a prison. The test had begun, and she already knew which of her children was truly rich. Living in Sarah's house was a symphony of small struggles that Eleanor hadn't heard in 40 years. The floorboards didn't just creak. They groaned under the weight of 3 adults and a toddler in a space meant for 2. The air always smelled of laundry detergent and whatever was on sale at the local grocer. For the first week, Eleanor played her part with a heavy heart. She remained silent, communicating only with nods, shaky handwriting on a notepad, and her eyes. She watched as Sarah pulled double shifts at the hospital, her face growing paler and the dark circles under her eyes deepening into bruises. One evening, Eleanor sat at the small kitchen table, watching Sarah's husband, Mark, count a small pile of crumpled bills. He was a carpenter who had been sidelined by a back injury, and the frustration was etched into the lines of his forehead. "We're short, Sarah," Mark whispered, thinking Eleanor couldn't hear him over the hum of the old refrigerator. "The rent increased, and with your mom here, the groceries, the heat, I don't know how we make it to the end of the month." Sarah didn't even look up from the stove where she was stretching a single box of pasta to feed 4 people. "She's my mother, Mark. What was I supposed to do? Let her sleep in the park? Jace and Beatrice won't even take my calls. They've blocked my number because they think I'm going to ask them for money to help her. I'm not saying we kick her out," Mark said, his voice cracking. "I'm just saying it's getting hard to breathe." Eleanor felt a lump in her throat that had nothing to do with her condition. She reached into the pocket of her tattered coat and pulled out the $50 bill Jace had shoved at her. She slid it across the table toward Mark. Mark looked at the bill, then at Eleanor. He pushed it back. "No, Eleanor, you keep that. That's all you have left. We'll find a way. We always do." Eleanor shook her head and pushed it back again, her eyes pleading. "Take it, please." Sarah walked over and wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at the $50 and then at her mother. "You keep that for your medicine, Mom. Or for a new pair of shoes. These ones are falling apart." She knelt beside Eleanor's chair. "I'm sorry you had to hear that. We aren't angry you're here. We're just tired." A few days later, a black town car pulled up in front of the small, peeling house. It looked like a shark in a goldfish pond. Jay stepped out, looking immaculate in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Sarah's car. He didn't come inside. He stood on the porch, checking his watch every 10 seconds. Sarah opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Jace, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to talk to Mother," he said, peering past her into the dim hallway. "Is she still not talking?" "She's traumatized, Jace. She lost her home, her dignity, everything." Sarah snapped, "Come in." Jace stepped into the living room, looking around with visible disdain. He sat on the edge of the sofa as if he were afraid he'd catch poverty from the fabric. Eleanor walked into the room, wearing one of Sarah's old oversized sweaters. "Listen," Jay started, not looking Eleanor in the eye. "I've been thinking. This situation isn't sustainable. The press is starting to sniff around. They found out you're staying here. It looks bad for my firm. People think I'm letting my mother live in a slum while I fly private." Eleanor tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "I found a place," Jace continued, pulling a brochure from his breast pocket. It's a state-assisted facility about 3 hours north. It's quiet, very private. They specialize in mental breaks. You will have a bed, 3 meals, and you won't have to worry Sarah and Mark anymore. I'll pay the first 6 months, just to get you settled. Sarah stepped forward, her face flushed with rage. A state facility? You mean a warehouse for the elderly? Jace, she's our mother, not a piece of faulty equipment you can just return. She's a liability. Sarah. Jace shouted, standing up. She's a felon. The FBI is still breathing down the company's neck. If I house her, I'm an accessory. This is the only way I can help without ruining myself. He looked at Eleanor. Pack your bag. I have the car outside. Let's get this over with. Eleanor didn't move. She looked at Sarah. She's not going anywhere, Sarah said, stepping between them. If you're so worried about your image, go buy another watch. But you're not taking her to some cold institution just so you can sleep better at night. Get out of my house. Jay sneered. Fine. Enjoy the burden. When the feds come knocking here because they think she's hiding money under the floorboards, don't call me. He slammed the door behind him. The house shook. That night, a storm rolled in. The wind whipped against the thin windows, and the roof leaked in 3 different places. Eleanor stayed awake, listening to the sound of Sarah crying softly in the next room while Mark tried to comfort her. I had to sell my engagement ring today, Mark, Sarah whispered. The jeweler didn't give me much, but it's enough for the heat bill and the property taxes. Sarah, no. It's just a rock, Sarah said, her voice trembling. I'd rather have my mom safe and warm than a diamond on my finger. But I'm scared, Mark. I'm so scared we're going to lose the house. Eleanor sat in the darkness, her hand gripping the edge of the quilt. The experiment was becoming a nightmare. She had seen the ugliness of Jace and Beatrice, but now she was seeing the price Sarah was paying for her goodness. She stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, she could see the glowing lights of the city, the world she had built, the world that thought she was dead. She picked up a notepad and wrote 4 words. The time is near. She knew she couldn't keep this up much longer. Not because she was tired of the poverty, but because she couldn't bear to see the only person who loved to suffer another day. But there was one more test, one that would prove if Sarah's love was truly unconditional, or if even she had a breaking point. The next morning, the doorbell rang again. It wasn't Jace. It was a man in a dark suit holding a legal envelope. Sarah Miller, the man asked. Yes. You've been served, he said, handing her the papers. A lawsuit has been filed by the Gable estate creditors. Since you are housing Eleanor Gable, they are claiming you are in possession of hidden assets. They are suing you for everything you own. Sarah turned gray. She looked at the papers, then back at Eleanor, who was standing in the kitchen doorway. This was the ultimate lie, the final turn of the screw Eleanor had coordinated with Henderson. Everything. Sarah whispered, They are taking the house. Unless you turn over the assets or evict her immediately, the man said. Sarah looked at her mother. The silence in the room was deafening. Eleanor waited for the rejection. She waited for Sarah to finally say, I can't do this anymore. You have to leave. Instead, Sarah looked at the man and tore the papers in half. Tell them to come and take it, Sarah said, her voice cold and steady. They can take the house, but they are not taking my mother. As the man walked away, Sarah turned to Eleanor and hugged her. It's okay, Mom. It's just a house. We'll find a way. Eleanor closed her eyes, a single, silent sob racking her body. The test was over. The atmosphere in Sarah's small house was thick with a scent of impending loss. Every time a car drove down the street, Sarah jumped, expecting the sheriff to arrive with an eviction notice. Despite the terror, she never looked at Eleanor with resentment. She simply worked harder, coming home with swollen ankles and a tired smile, pretending that losing their home was just another hurdle they would clear. Eleanor watched it all from her corner of the kitchen. Her heart was a battleground of guilt and pride. She knew it was time to end the charade, but she needed a final confrontation, a moment where the master of her other children would be stripped away in front of the one person they looked down upon. She picked up her notepad and wrote a message to Sarah. Invite them. Jace, Beatrice, tell them I have found a hidden key. Tell them to meet us at the old mansion tomorrow at noon. Sarah frowned, reading the note. The hidden key? Mom, what are you talking about? The feds took the mansion. We aren't even allowed on the property. Eleanor simply took Sarah's hand and squeezed it, her eyes projecting a sudden, sharp clarity that Sarah hadn't seen in weeks. Reluctantly, Sarah made the calls. The return to the gates. The next day, a heavy mist hung over the city, making the iron gates of the Gable estate look like the bars of a birdcage. Jace arrived first, his black SUV idling loudly. Beatrice pulled up moments later, wearing a black veil and oversized sunglasses as if she were attending a funeral for someone she barely knew. They stood by the gate, looking annoyed, until Sarah's battered old sedan pulled up. Sarah helped Eleanor out of the car. This better be worth it, Sarah, Jay snapped, checking his watch. I'm missing a board meeting. If his hidden key is just some sentimental junk from the attic, I'm leaving. I don't even know why I'm here, Beatrice sighed, waving a hand in front of her face to ward off the damp air. The smell of this neighborhood is getting on my clothes. Is he going to talk or just point at things like a mime again? The gate suddenly buzzed and swung open. The feds must have cleared the entry, Jace muttered, walking toward the front doors. They entered the foyer. The house was cold and echoing. All the furniture had been covered in white sheets, making the room look like it was filled with ghosts. Eleanor walked to the center of the grand staircase, her tattered coat a sharp contrast to the marble floor. Okay, Mother, Beatrice said, her voice echoing. We're here. Where is this key? Is there a safe? Is there offshore gold? Give us something we can actually use to fix this mess. Eleanor pointed toward the library, the room where the most valuable first editions and art had been kept. Jace and Beatrice didn't wait. They bolted for the room, pushing past Sarah as if she weren't there. They began tearing at the sheets, throwing books onto the floor, looking for a hidden wall safe or a floorboard that rattled. Nothing. Jace shouted, his face turning a frantic, ugly purple. There's nothing here but dust. He turned on Eleanor, who had followed them into the room. You brought us here for what? To watch you lose your mind? You're broke, Mom. You're a failure. You've embarrassed us for the last time. Beatrice stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with a cold, sharp light. I'm done. I'm calling that facility Jace found. You're going there today. I don't care if Sarah objects. I'll sign the papers myself as the eldest daughter. You're a burden, and I'm tired of carrying the weight of your shadow. Sarah stepped in front of Eleanor, her small frame trembling but her voice like iron. Don't you touch her. You haven't seen her in weeks. You didn't see her shivering. You didn't see her crying. You only see the money you lost. You aren't her children. You're just leeches. Shut up, Sarah. Jace barked. You're just as much of a loser as she is. You'll be on the street by Monday. Maybe you can share a cardboard box with her. The room went silent. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock that hadn't yet been hauled away. Then a voice cut through the air, clear, powerful, and cold as a winter morning. The only people leaving this house today, Eleanor said, her voice projecting with the authority of the CEO she had always been, are the two of you. Jace and Beatrice froze. Jace actually stumbled back, hitting a bookshelf. Beatrice dropped her designer clutch, her mouth hanging open. Mother! Beatrice whispered. You can talk. Eleanor stepped out from behind Sarah, shedding the tattered wool coat to reveal a sharp, black silk dress she had hidden underneath. She straightened her posture, and suddenly she looked 10 feet tall. I never lost my voice, Eleanor said, walking toward Jace. I just wanted to see what you would say when you thought I couldn't hear you. And I heard everything. Jace, I heard you call me a liability. I felt the $50 you shoved at me like I was a stranger on the street. She turned to Beatrice. And you You denied I was your mother in front of your elite friends. You sent me to a shelter because my presence might ruin your gala. Mom, wait, it was a misunderstanding. Jay stammered, his hands shaking. The bankruptcy, the fraud, we were just trying to protect the family name. There was no fraud, Jace, Eleanor said, her eyes flashing. The bankruptcy was a play, a performance. Every asset is exactly where it was, except for one thing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, gold-embossed folder. The inheritance, she said softly. The hidden key isn't to a safe. It's to the future of this company. Jace reached for the folder, his greed overriding his shock. I knew it. I knew you wouldn't let it all go. Give it here. I'll manage the transition. Eleanor pulled it back. She looked at Sarah, who was standing by the door, tears streaming down her face, her head spinning from the sudden reversal. This folder contains a deed to the Gable estate, the majority shares of the logistics firm, and a trust fund that will ensure 1,000 community schools like yours, Sarah, never have to close their doors again. Eleanor walked over to Sarah and placed the folder in her hands. This belongs to the only child I have who knows that a home is made of heart, not marble. Jace let out a guttural sound of protest. You can't do this. It's not legal. We're your blood. Blood. Eleanor turned on him, her voice rising. You shared my blood, but Sarah shared my pain. You offered me a motel and a nursing home. She offered me her own bed and her last piece of bread. The test is over, Jace, and you both failed. As the realization hit them, a new group of people walked into the library. It was Mr. Henderson, accompanied by 2 security guards. Mr. Henderson, Eleanor said, her voice calm again, please escort these strangers off my property, and ensure their access to any and all family funds is terminated immediately. They are no longer associated with the Gable name. Beatrice started to scream, a shrill, desperate sound, while Jace tried to plead with Henderson, but the guards were firm. They were led out of the library, past the covered furniture, and out into the cold mist they had so recently looked down upon. The library fell silent. Sarah looked down at the folder in her hands, then at her mother. Mom! Sarah whispered, Why? Why did you put yourself through all that? Eleanor took Sarah's hands, her eyes finally softening. Because I was losing my soul. Sarah, I thought I had failed as a mother because I saw what Jace and Beatrice had become. I needed to know if I had left anything good in this world. And in that tiny, cramped house of yours, I found it. She kissed Sarah's forehead. You didn't just save me, honey. You stirred my soul back to life. The iron gates of the Gable estate didn't just close behind Jace and Beatrice. They seemed to seal a tomb. For the first time in 30 years, the mansion was silent, not the cold, calculated silence of Eleanor's experiment, but the quiet of a house finally at peace. In the weeks that followed, the world shifted on its axis. The news of the Gable miracle, the revelation that the bankruptcy was a ruse and the empire was intact, sent shockwaves through the financial districts. But while the newspapers focused on the stocks and the scandals, the real story was happening in the quiet corners of the city. For Jace, the descent was swift and brutal. Without the backing of the Gable name and the secret infusions of capital from his mother's trust, his firm was revealed to be a house of cards built on ego and high-interest debt. His friends in the corporate world vanished like smoke. A month after the reveal, Jace sat in a cramped office in a basement-level commercial park. He was no longer looking at IPOs. He was looking at liquidation notices. He reached for his phone to call his mother, but he stopped. He remembered the look in her eyes as she stood on the staircase, the look of a woman who had finally seen through him. He realized that the $50 he had given her wasn't just an insult. It was the exact price he had put on his own soul. He was now worth exactly that much. Beatrice fared no better. The Golden Petal Gala had been her peak, and her fall were public. When the elite found out she had discarded her bankrupt mother, she became a social leper. Her sponsors pulled out, her brand deals evaporated, and she was forced to sell a designer wardrobe just to pay the lease on her white Ferrari. She moved into a small apartment, the very kind she used to mock, and spent her nights looking at old photos of a family she had never truly cherished. Meanwhile, the small, peeling house on the edge of the city was filled with boxes. But they weren't boxes of debt. They were boxes of memories. Sarah refused to move into the mansion immediately. "It's too big, Mom," she said, laughing as she packed away her toddler's toys. "I get lost looking for the kitchen." But Eleanor insisted. "The house needs a soul. Sarah, it's been a museum for too long. It needs a child running through the halls and the smell of your burnt toast." Sarah used the inheritance not for diamonds or Ferraris, but for the one thing that mattered to her. The Sarah Miller Foundation was born, and the struggling community school she had worked so hard to save was transformed into a state-of-the-art learning center. She hired Mark to oversee the construction of new housing for the elderly in the neighborhood, places that felt like homes, not institutions. 6 months later, the Gable Mansion was hosting a different kind of event. There were no cameras, no socialites, and no velvet ropes. It was a simple Sunday dinner. Eleanor sat at the head of the long mahogany table. To her right sat Sarah, Mark, and their son, who was currently trying to feed a piece of broccoli to the family dog. The room was warm, lit by the glow of the fireplace and the sound of genuine laughter. "Mom," Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze Eleanor's hand. "I still can't believe all of this. Sometimes I wake up and think I'm still in that little kitchen, worrying about the heat bill." Eleanor looked at her daughter, her eyes shining with a peace she had never known when she was just a billionaire. "The heat bill was the best thing that ever happened to us, Sarah. It showed me that the warmest place in the world isn't a house with a furnace. It's a house with a heart." She looked out the window at the sprawling gardens. She knew that Jason and Beatrice were out there somewhere, struggling to rebuild lives that were once so easy. She had sent them each a final letter, not of malice, but of hope, telling them that the door wasn't locked forever, but the key was something they had to find within themselves. "You know," Eleanor said, raising her glass of water, "people always ask me how I built a logistics empire. They want to know the secret to success." "What do you tell them?" Mark asked. Eleanor smiled, a soul-stirring smile that reached her eyes. "I tell them that I spent 70 years learning how to make money, but it only took 1 month of silence to learn how to live. Success isn't what you gather. It's what you give when you have nothing left." Eleanor Gable didn't just reclaim her fortune. She reclaimed her life. She realized that the walls of a mansion can be just as cold as a prison if they aren't filled with the people who would love you even if those walls were made of cardboard. Jason and Beatrice spent their lives building towers of gold, only to find they had nowhere to stand when the wind blew. But Sarah built a home out of kindness, sacrifice, and a love that didn't need a bank statement to prove its worth. We often spend our days chasing the things we think will make us someone. But perhaps the greatest success isn't being known by the world. It's being the person who stays when the world walks away. If this story touched your heart today, let it be a reminder to cherish the people who stand by you in your darkest hours. Before you go, I have a question for you. If you lost everything tomorrow, who is the one person you know would open their door for you? Let us know in the comments. Sometimes, just acknowledging them is a way of saying thank you. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to Soul Stir Stories. We bring you tales that challenge the heart and remind us of what truly matters. Thank you for watching, and remember, the richest person in the world isn't the one with the most, but the one who needs the least to be happy. We'll see you in the next story.